Hello everyone, nubkeks here. Welcome back to Nub Raids. I'm back. I was away for a few days, but I'm back in business. I'm going on holiday for a week in about a week and a half again. But hey, it's fine. We're here for now, and that's what matters. In today's video, I kind of call this only 3% of you will know this. I bet that that's actually a bit of a bait. I think less than 3% of you will know all of the facts in today's video. In fact, I'd be surprised if anyone knows all of the facts in today's video. And it is something that I've noticed becoming much more important and much more common in the game in the last few weeks and months. Let's go. So obviously, the 3% is a reference to the 3% rule. In case you guys don't know, this is actually a post I found back from 2020. But when you are placing debuffs in this game, or trying to resist debuffs, there's essentially always a 3% chance that it will or won't work, depending on which. So this is accuracy versus resistance. And you can see when we're equal, you've got a 92.5% chance. If I have 500 accuracy, you 500 resist, 92.5% chance I land my debuffs or buff strips or whatever. I can go up to 100 plus and I'll be at 97%, but I can never, apart from the champs in this video, I can never go beyond 97% chance to succeed. There will always be a 3% chance to fail. And likewise, even if you have way more accuracy than me, or sorry, way more resistance, and I'm still trying to place debuffs, 3% of the time, I'll still succeed. Even if you have 1,000 resistance and I have 0 accuracy, 3% of the time, it can still happen. We can get lucky, and it can happen. And I do think I built a team recently, or I switched up my team. This is for Sand Devil. And I've got 2 champions in here now that can do this. I think the event dungeons have shown this to be really important as well. But for example, in this Sand Devil team, 2 champions we're going to talk about, they're these 2 right here. Guaranteed sleep from Sifi. In fact, the only champion in the game that I could see that can do the guaranteed sleep. I only looked at mythicals and legendaries, though, I will say, for this video. And then a guaranteed decreased defense from Quintus. Why is this important? Well, for example, in this team, if I used a different sleep champion than Sifi, if I used a champion who could, and which is why I changed it, because I used to, if I used a champion who could fail to place decreased defense, the run can fail. When you've got the guaranteed buffs or debuffs, then the run becomes 100%. I think another perfect example, and then we'll break down the stuff, is the event dungeon right now. So this event dungeon, I actually whipped out Yakarl the Scourge to upgrade this team. I was using Gurgo the Augur before. A better champion, really, by any standards, any metrics. But what does Yakarl do? Well, when enemies have high turn meter, his freeze cannot be resisted, which means that with Gurgo the Augur, there was always a 3% chance that Kaja could resist his freeze, and then she could cleanse everyone. With Yakarl, it is physically impossible for Kaja to resist the freeze, and therefore this team becomes 100%. And in fact, we've got another champ we're going to mention, Alatreon Blade Master, for some guaranteed stuff as well. So any further ado, I've got these arranged somewhat in order. We'll blitz through this pretty quickly. Let me know if I miss any obvious ones. And yeah, without any further ado, let's go. First of all, we've got a very old champion. We're going to talk about HP Burns first, and it is Ignatius. Where is he? Ignatius comes in with an AoE attack on a 5-turn cooldown. He's old, but it's a burn debuff that cannot be resisted. Very useful for Spider, or any of the Spider bosses to have burns that will not fail you and make things 100%. We have Walking Tomb Drain in the Knight's Revenant. Again, same thing. AoE HP burn that cannot be resisted. A single target version of this, also very useful. I've clicked on the wrong champion, but it's Elenarl. She has a HP burn on her A1 that cannot be resisted. So there you go. Very, very nice. Now, a more premium champion, Gizmak. Very relevant for Arena, but if he has 100% crit rate, he puts burn on everyone at the start of the fight. That cannot be resisted. And then he's also doing some other stuff. He can put decreased speed that cannot be resisted as well, and all that sort of stuff. So he does a bunch of things. And in fact, in his second form, it's something we'll come back to, he does have decreased defense that cannot be resisted if enemies are under burn. So he can do, and Pain Link too, he does a lot of stuff that can't be resisted, and I think that's very, very strong. A mythical that's much more situational in doing this, but it's Alaz. He does have an AoE burn that cannot be resisted by enemies under Stone Skin, and then it activates them. So that's very niche, but it is still worth noting, especially for Arena. Speaking of arena, there's several, like I said, several champs that can do stuff with burns. Volcanos, of course, he can be placing a burn on enemies, and if he has one demon spawn ally, HP burns placed by his passive cannot be resisted or blocked. Again, that is very, very powerful. And then a bit of a weird one here. We do have Ashnar. He can burn allies, and that can't be blocked or resisted. So if you ever need to burn your allies, this guy will do it 100% of the time. He cannot fail. That's very niche, but I thought it was a fun one to throw in. In terms of poisons, I actually found nobody really that does it. Now, one slight exception, Vizug. He doesn't make them unresistible, but with 3 Ogren, HP burns and poisons placed by allies cannot be removed, stolen, or transferred. So that could actually be pretty useful for some bosses in the future. They could still resist your burns or poison, but once those go on, they can't get rid of them. So that's kind of interesting. And then Gerptuk in the same faction, he cannot do this to enemies, but again, he can poison your teammates with a small version of poison, 3 of them, and they can't be resisted or blocked. So that's a pretty fun one. So there you go. Not much in terms of poison. It's interesting. We've got a lot of burn champions that can do these irresistible burns, but not so with poisons, at least that I was able to find. Let me know if I missed one, though. It's certainly possible. For sleep, there's only one champion in the game, and that's Sifi. So important for Sand Devil. It's actually kind of crazy to me. It's actually crazy. For Sand Devil, if you want to sleep that will not fail, Sifi is, as far as I'm aware, the only option. If the target's turn meter is equal or above 50%, her sleep cannot be resisted. It is 100% successful. Every other sleep champion in the game, 3% chance to fail, and your Sand Devil run probably will die. For freeze, there's again only a couple of options for freeze. AoE, certainly. Yakarl is a great one. 100% chance to freeze that cannot be resisted by targets with 75% or more turn meter. So they need to have high turn meter, but it is an AoE freeze that's guaranteed. You just saw that in my event dungeon team. Recent Fusion Lady Noelle gives you another way to do this. Hers is even better, but she's got a shorter cooldown, 3 turn AoE freeze that cannot be resisted or blocked. But you do need Sir Nicholas on the same team. So this can actually not be blocked either. This is very, very useful and is a big one to watch. In fact, when I was thinking about this video, I was doing like the couples tier list a few days ago. This has been something I've been reflecting on, is that often these couples and faction unity champs and mythicals are bringing you in these sort of really strong sources of debuffs that are super consistent. And I mean, I think we're already seeing, with, like I said, these dungeons becoming more important as time goes on. There's a couple. Sir Nick has a freeze on his A1, but it's unreliable. Glakid as well, he can have a freeze. Glycea, she can freeze. I think with her passive, that can't be resisted, but they're very unreliable, so I figured let's not mention them too much. For stuns, very limited. Very, very limited. Actually, a brand new guy, the Admiral Black Tusk, he can do it. So he can do an irresistible stun. It's not super reliable and only when attacking outside of his active turn. But on his A3 here, he can remove all buffs and do a 2-turn stun, and those cannot be resisted with one dwarf ally. So it's single target, but an irresistible buff removal and stun for a single target, which is pretty cool. One very niche one is Basatha. He has a stun that can't be resisted or blocked for 1 turn when an enemy is revived. Very niche, probably not very useful, but it is there. And then one that is incredibly powerful, Mr. Nice the Shadow Thief. First of all, he does have a steal, turn meter steal that cannot be resisted by enemies at more than 50% turn meter in Form 1. In Form 2, if he has 50% HP or less, he does an AoE stun that cannot be resisted. If he has more than 75% HP, he does an AoE provoke that cannot be resisted. So Nice, he's one of the best champs in the game for a reason. He's got a bunch of stuff that can't be resisted, which is very strong. Provoke. Provoke. Couple of options here. One niche option, but useful to know about, is Harima. She does have an AoE provoke that cannot be blocked or resisted if enemies are from the Demon Spawn faction. That's unlikely to be crazy useful, but it does show up in Arena. Alaz, he can do a provoke. Oh, he's in his wrong form. Alaz can do a 2-turn provoke that cannot be resisted if the target is less than 50% HP. Again, that's a little bit awkward to make work in some sort of dungeon speed farm team, but it's worth noting. A recent rework has brought a very reliable one. Skullard Vargal, he has a provoke, single target provoke, but on a 2-turn cooldown that can't be resisted if he's got 1 lizard. At the same time, he also has an AoE decrease attack that cannot be resisted if there's 1 lizard. Well, this is one to watch. This could actually be kind of clutch for potentially like event dungeon stuff in the future to make stuff 100% guaranteed, which is pretty cool. And again, like I said, provoke is very limited. Another one, another faction unity. It's Aragaz. He has an AoE provoke. Yeah, if you have 3 faction allies, 3 other orcs, the provoke from his A3 cannot be resisted. So provoke, very limited. Very few options there. Fears and True Fears, there's a few. I didn't put them properly on the list, but Fortis can do some of the stuff, but it's kind of bad. Some of the ones that are kind of useful. Nell, not a mythical you hear talked about much, but she does have a 2-turn True Fear that cannot be resisted or blocked by enemies at 50% HP or less. That's a bit niche, but it's worth noting. A common one that you'll see all the time in Arena is Taras. Taras on, I think it's this passive, yeah, puts fear on enemies from orcs, ogre tribes, undead hordes, and demon spawn at the beginning of the round for a turn, and it cannot be resisted. That's very, very common in Arena because he's so strong. A couple ones then that are very powerful. Another faction unity, Falmond. He has full buff. Yeah, he's got a full buff strip that, and in fact, it upgrades to a steal that cannot be resisted. So he can steal all buffs and have it be irresistible. And then if he doesn't kill his initial target, he does a guaranteed True Fear on all enemies for 1 turn. I believe this does mean that it cannot be resisted. Guaranteed True Fear if he doesn't kill an enemy. That's pretty niche, but it's worth noting. Another very niche True Fear one is you'll almost never see this used. And funny that it doesn't include Sylvan Watchers, in my opinion. But Danag has an AoE decrease accuracy and True Fear. Champions from High Elves and Dark Elves factions cannot resist these debuffs. Interesting that they didn't apply it to Sylvan Watchers, but there you go. Now, and again, another faction unity. This one is much more reliable. Tribune Heraclites, or Tribune, I don't know. But he has a True Fear that cannot be resisted or blocked if he is dead. And he does this constantly as well. I think he also has, a shield buff from himself that cannot be removed. That's, I think, not too important to note. But he's a very consistent single target True Fear. It's not reliable, but it's there. And then a champion that people will get in another few months, I think. Embrys does a bunch of stuff that's irresistible. So first of all, Necrosis that cannot be resisted or blocked. Then he can be basically swapping stuff. Yeah, so if enemies have any Necrosis stacks, he starts to do a ton of stuff, like a ton. So any Necrosis, a bunch of irresistible stuff. Changing Stone Skin into True Fear, block debuffs into block buffs. Any buffs positively affecting stats, he flips them. He can steal turn meter and decrease turn meter. Yeah, he does a ton of stuff that's irresistible. On his A2, he has an AoE True Fear and decrease attack. Cannot be resisted if there's any Necrosis stacks. So yeah, he's doing quite a lot of stuff. Now, triggering Necrosis, you basically have to kill one of the enemies, but I could see this being a thing in an event dungeon. You kill some enemies, and then bam, you've got a bunch of unblockable effects, essentially. I think you can still block them, but they're irresistible. They will happen, which is pretty spicy. For block active skills and block passive skills, I'll put these two together. There's a couple. One, it's not, he can still be resisted, but Carnage, this is worth noting, I think. He's got protected debuffs. They're very rare. Protected debuffs. He has block passives and block actives, and both of these are protected. He can debuff spread them with his passive, and that can't be resisted. And then he also has a seal as well. And this cannot be resisted or blocked if they've got low HP. The debuff also is protected. It can't be removed. So Carnage is doing a lot of interesting stuff. He's extremely powerful. An amazing reward in Cursed City. I think people really underestimate Carnage in Arena. He is brilliant. Yeah, Carnage, he does a bunch of stuff. It's very strong. All that spreading around these debuffs that cannot be removed and are locking people out is very good. A champion that a lot of you will have, Rhonda. She has block passives and block active single target that cannot be resisted. These, I would say, again, these are more PvP leaning, but in any wave-based content, this stuff can also be really strong. I'm thinking about new faction wars. If that comes out, event dungeons in the future could be very valuable. This is one I totally forgot. In the Sacred Order, Roshgard the Tower. You often really just think about him as the block damage champ, but he does have block actives and block buffs, single target, can't be resisted. So there you go. That could be really nice for some event dungeon bosses. And then another champion that's often forgotten about because he's just not that good, but Karato Foxhunter, he does have AoE block active skills that cannot be resisted if Yumiko's on the same team. Oh, hey, Karato, he's actually doing something. Who knew? When we come over to Lockout, increasing enemy skills, very few examples. One of my favorite champs, Lazarius, he can do it with his passive. Whenever he kills an enemy, now it does have a 3-turn cooldown, he increases their skills by 2 turns. And yeah, he cannot be resisted. If he kills 2 or more enemies in a single attack, it can't be resisted. So yeah, there you go. Pretty cool. Very strong. Very nice. He does some cool stuff. Now, another one. Again, you might not remember this one. Very unpopular champ, but Hansel. Hansel, if Gretel is on the same team, he will increase the cooldown of enemy skills by 2 turns of all their skills, and it cannot be resisted. So hey, they're the only 2 I could find. If you want an irresistible Lockout skill, increasing enemy skills, you either have Lazarius or you've got Hansel with Gretel. That's it. They're the only options. And Hansel's is honestly a lot easier to do. I'd say Lazarius is going to be stronger, more common in Arena for sure. But yeah, that was kind of crazy to me. Block buffs. Easy to see, you know, easy, several, like against an Odin and whatnot, especially like block buffs. It's easy to see how a guaranteed block buffs, one that can't be stopped, could be useful. There's not that many options. A very niche one is Archbishop Pinthroy, very niche. He's got heal reduction and block buffs. Champs from Demon Spawn, Undead, and Knights Revenant cannot resist. Very niche. Now, one I think is actually really good, and hopefully we'll get another Hound to go with him sometime, but Packmaster Shayak. He does have AoE block buffs that can't be resisted if there are at least one of these Hounds on the same team. Hopefully we'll get better Hounds. That has been teased and it's not happened yet. Hopefully that will happen at some point. And yeah, he could really become very useful for some of these bosses because of it. And then another one that I totally forgot myself. Again, it's hard to see him being useful, but there you go. Morty Macabre. He's got AoE block buffs. Cannot be resisted if a target's under heal reduction. That's tricky. So you got to have the irresistible heal reduction. There's not many can do that. And then he can do the irresistible block buffs. My big takeaway from this one was honestly, Packmaster Shayak. Yo, whenever we do get another Hound, he becomes one of the only sources reliably of the 100% block buffs. No failure chance. For heal reduction was interesting. We saw Archbishop Pinthroy. Again, he was doing it against some specific enemies. There's very few. One that's definitely worth mentioning. She's amazing for Amius. Heal reduction. Now, this can be resisted, but this heal reduction is protected. It can't be removed, transferred, spread, or have its duration increased or decreased. She does it every turn as well. This is amazing against Amius. It's very, very good. And the only other one I could find, apart from those 2, maybe a reason to actually have considered him for this deck of Fate. But we do have, over here, Knave of Hearts. Swaps HP with an enemy, puts heal reduction on the enemy for 2 turns. The debuff cannot be removed. Oh, sorry, I misread. So it can be resisted, but it can't be removed. Derp, I misread that one. So yeah, this one can be resisted, but it can't be removed, transferred, or have its duration decreased. So actually, maybe not that important. We do still have, Margain in the same faction, but it is something interesting. That's very rare that Knave of Hearts can do. Very few champs. So yeah, the only true irresistible heal reduction then is Pinthroy against certain very specific factions. So that's something that's very unreliable. We've got some buff stealing and some turn meter manipulation. Okay, let's go in. A champion I like now, but a lot of people hate on, Eilil. He can do some stuff. So his A1, he can steal all buffs the first time he hits an enemy with this skill, and it can't be resisted. And then his A3, he removes increased defense and puts decreased defense, removes strength and puts weaken, or puts block buffs if they don't have any, and the buff removal debuff placement cannot be resisted. I should have put him earlier. So this is your other source of block buffs that cannot be stopped. He can do it. He can also basically do a guaranteed decreased defense if they've got increased defense, and weaken if they've got strengthen. That's obviously unusual, But yeah, Eilil, he's got some potential there with some unresistible or irresistible things. So that's quite spicy. Now, Loki, a champion everyone will likely have, or most of you will have. He can do when he's under Perfect Veil, and he does Perfect Veil at the start. He can steal all buffs from a target and also steal 100% turn meter, and they cannot be resisted if he's under Veil or Perfect Veil. That is potentially very strong. Yeah, against a single target. Most bosses are immune to turn meter steal, but still, it is worth noting. Going back to old Hansel and Gretel, when she is with Hansel, does a 50% turn meter decrease that cannot be resisted. This is very unusual. There's actually not that many champs that can be decreasing or stealing turn meter, so she can do that, which is pretty nice. Acrisia can actually be doing turn meter stealing, single target again. If she attacks a target with higher max HP, she will steal 100% turn meter before attacking, and it can't be resisted. Again, most bosses are immune, but she can do it. In the same faction, Arnon, if he kills an enemy, he will decrease the turn meters of all enemies by 50%, cannot be resisted. Yeah, it's possible we could see some event dungeon stuff where this is important, and then a pay-only champion, only available with money, Xena. She steals 20% turn meter from each enemy, can't be resisted if they're under 2 or more buffs or debuffs. So there you go. Not too many options with the turn meter stuff, honestly. A couple of interesting ones then for removing buffs as well. We touched on Loki, who can steal all buffs, and Eilil, who can steal all buffs. I mixed these two together. Maybe that was a mistake. We do have Constantine, buffed recently. So his A1, he does have a decreased defense that can't be resisted, but it's only single target. But his A3, before attacking, steals all buffs from the target and transfers all debuffs from him to the target. Can't be resisted if lad's the same team. So we've got that single target guaranteed buff steal, and also single target guaranteed decreased defense. Actually kind of nice for Constantine. That's quite cool. Vitreous, very niche, but he does have, before attacking, removes increased defense, ally protection, and strengthen. Can't be resisted. Okay, cool. If we ever ran into like a neck rat or something in an event dungeon, he could be pretty darn useful there. And then a new champ, again, Faction Unity, Losencleth. He can come in, and before attacking, he removes buffs from a target enemy. Can't be resisted if the target's attacked him before this turn. I think that's a lot more awkward to activate. But yeah, there you go. In terms of stealing buffs and, yeah, removing buffs and doing that sort of thing, a few champions, and turn meter, again, is quite limited. There's not that many. Few options, but they're a little bit clunky. Decrease defense, then, and weaken. Very few champs can do that, but decrease defense, there's a few, and this is obviously a key debuff. We started the video looking at him, but Quintus, decreased defense, can't be resisted or blocked. Brilliant. It's also, actually, he also has got the buff removal. So buff removal, decreased defense, can't be resisted or blocked. I think that's actually super useful. Do not sleep on your Quintus. It's perhaps the most useful thing that he does, really, for a late game account that picks him up from Live Arena. Actually pretty good. The OG classic, I believe he's a Dark Elf, is Ghostborn, often paired with Seer back in the day. Decreased defense, can't be resisted. Simple, but effective. Baron, same thing as Quintus, actually, in the Bannerlords, Mr. Baron. He comes in with decreased defense. Now, this is a fun... He's so old, this debuff is guaranteed. I think we saw one of the new champs said that as well, didn't they? They have a guaranteed debuff. Very rare that they use it. I think it's a really interesting thing. How do you describe skills? Like, you know, if some older champions will be like, reduces their turn meter by this much and gains an equal amount of turn meter, instead of just saying the turn meter steal, like we might have these days. But yeah, he has a guaranteed decreased defense. So there you are. Bellinor, this was one from the couples video. Pretty interesting. If Xavia is there, he does have decreased defense and weaken, AoE as a void that cannot be resisted. So that's actually pretty good, and maybe I was kind of underrating that, to be honest. I think it's pretty cool. Another couple, Jetney, again, it's relatively rare, AoE decreased defense that cannot be resisted if Alsgore is there. So there you go. Not many that can do it. And then, of course, we mentioned earlier the mythical Gizmak in Form 2. He does have decreased defense, can't be resisted if they're under burn. So you've got a couple of options for single target. Your options for AoE decreased defense that can't be resisted. Jetney, Bellinor with Xavia, Jetney with Alsgore, and Gizmak if they're burned. And Ghostborn. And that's it. I think Ghostborn is certainly the most common. He's the OG. There's a few more options now, but they're kind of rare. Defensive buffs, I picked out a few defensive buffs. There's some that are pretty impactful. For defensive buffs, you can make use of Cardials. It's a bit awkward, but he does have Revive on Death, can't be removed. Bit tricky to see how you'd use that for a dungeon, but there it is. For Knight's Revenant, Elatrion Blademaster does a ton. Unfortunately, he's no longer available to anyone, but he does have block debuffs, which is protected. He's got increased defense and shield against bosses, protected. So when you're against bosses, he can do protected block debuffs, shield, and increased defense. That's kind of nuts. So it's super reliable, you know, against Queen of Hearts right now, who's stripping your buffs, putting True Fear. Protection set, not good enough. Elatrion can do it. You could also use a Shamail. He can do it. You could use a Cleanser. You might get away with it, right? But it's a little bit tricky. Brogni, OG classic champion. He has a shield. The shield cannot be removed. It's a protected shield. Another protected shield champion. You might have forgotten this one. Snick Track. And yeah, over here. It's this move over here. If there's a leech, enemy under leech, he has a protected shield. One I forgot, and you guys explained it to me in a video because I didn't understand what was happening. Lanatharil, he has a shield. Great. But if there's any dead allies, and that's something that could be quite easy to orchestrate, put in like a level 1 common or something, great. He does a bigger shield, and the shield cannot be removed. It's basically a protected shield. So there you go. You can get a protected shield very, very easily. One that's very common, Strengthen from Marishka. She does a protected Strengthen. Yeah, very good. And she also does a massive shield as well. That's not protected, but the Strengthen is. You've got Nekret the Great. He does a bunch of buffs. The ally protection buff he puts out is protected. So he's got a protected ally protection on a single target. Again, common in arena. One that's potentially very strong. I've been down on this guy, but I was like, you know what? It's actually pretty good. Aislinn on his A3. Big shield and ally protection. Block damage on himself with 2 faction allies. With 3 faction allies, they're protected. So this guy, you get protected block damage on him, and a big protected shield and protected ally protection on your teammates. So yeah, Aislinn, I've often been very critical of him as a faction unity. That actually has a lot of potential for bosses in the future. It's pretty cool. Speaking of faction unity, Fina, protected with 3 faction allies, increased attack, crit rate, and crit damage. It's okay. And then you got, there's a couple other funky ones in there. I'd mention very quickly that, you know, we got protected counterattack for himself, for Wixwell. Kind of fun. Dunelord Gregor, faction unity. He has a very interesting one. It's over here with 3 faction allies. When counterattacking, instant effects and debuffs placed by ally skills cannot be resisted or blocked. That's obviously very unusual. It'd be, you know, I can't think of an easy team you'd build anywhere that would be using this, but it is interesting. You have to be mostly barbarians, but you could make their A1s 100%. I guess the problem would be that A1s often don't have 100% chances to place the debuffs in the first place, but that is a spicy one. It is worth considering. It's there. Dunelord, worth mentioning. Another one that's, I think, very awkward to use, Androck. He does have a Enfeeble that cannot be removed if enemies have 50% HP or less. Bosses are immune to Enfeeble, of course, because of him. But yeah, he does have an Enfeeble that's protected, which is unusual. And then something I think is very niche, very unusual. But let's end on this guy because I think it's funny. Green Warden Ruark. He steals continuous heal buffs from each enemy, and that can't be resisted. So there you go. If we're ever fighting a boss that has a ton of continuous heals everywhere and we can't get through it, Green Warden Ruark, he'll steal them all, and you can't stop him. There you go. Guys, let me know if I missed any obvious ones. I'm sure I probably have. But I just thought that would be a fun one to go through. A bunch of the champions. Which were I've got my whole list over here. Which ones stood out for me? Number 1, like I said, lots of burns. I was very surprised. Poisons. Very little protected for guaranteed poisons. Sleep is shocking with Sand Devil. That Sifi's the only reliable option. AoE freeze for this event dungeon really stood out to me as being valuable. Stun, very few options really that are reliable to actually exploit. It does make Admiral Blacktusk. It's single target, but that is very good. And then nice is nice. Provoke, Skull Lord stood out to me, or Soul Lord as I've written here. Again, sort of a mini faction unity champion, but yeah, provoke and decrease attack. Very reliably, just 1 lizard in there and they're guaranteed. Pretty cool. The fears are fairly unreliable. I do think that Embrys, he's doing so much. That's something to bear in mind when we start getting him in a few months. He stands out. The block active, block passive. Yeah, block actives is surprising. There's quite a few options, actually. Quite good ones. There you are. Lockout. I was very surprised with Hansel. He stood out to me. Block buffs. Yeah, again, Shayak really stood out to me. That's one massively to watch in the future. Heal reduction. You've got none that are guaranteed. And then, like, the buff stealing. I need to flip these. We got the turn meter. Hang on. Yeah. I mixed these up. They were initially the one thing. We've got, like, stealing buffs and turn meter stuff. Yeah, we've got a few buff things happening. Bit unreliable. Turn meter, again, is quite rare. Again, Hansel and Gretel actually came out of this in a much more favorable light than I expected. The guaranteed lockout, super rare. Guaranteed turn meter decrease, also pretty darn rare. So yeah, Hansel and Gretel did quite well. Decreased defense, Bellinor and Jetney did really well. Baron and Quintus being super valuable as well for the single target. That's pretty rare. And then, like I said, the defensive buffs. Yeah, I think Aislinn actually came out looking pretty good to me. Being like, yeah, that and Elatrion, that's pretty strong. Or Snicktra, as I wrote. So there you go. Guys, let me know what you think. Anything that surprised you in this video, anything I missed, do let me know. It's good to be back. I'll see you all for the next video soon. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.